Honorable members, thank you very much indeed, and it's for the opportunity to be here today. It's always a pleasure to be in the House, and I truly appreciate this chance to deliver the statement, and I just want to assure the House, indeed all parliamentarians, of the onerous responsibilities you have in the discharge of your oversight functions, and in that regard, I'm obligated, like all ministers, to respond to the House when one is called. Mr. Speaker, with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic statement, the Ministry, Mr. Speaker, allocates resources for various expenditures by the various bodies. The distinction between allocations for expenditure and actual expenditures incurred must be made. The two are not the same. And the Auditor General at the end of every year is required to complement the efforts of Parliament by auditing and reporting on the public accounts of Ghana to parliamentarians according to Article 187(2). The Auditor General must submit this report of audit to Parliament, drawing attention to any irregularities in the accounts audited in line. Mr. Speaker, in the governance architecture, Parliament is the body charged with the oversight responsibility to track and trace the usage of allocated resources. Resources are allocated to various ministries, departments, and agencies, the other arms of government, as well as the constitutional bodies, and also some state enterprises among others. The Ministry of Finance has a responsibility to do the allocation of resources of the state, and that's expressed in the budget statement presented to the House from time to time. After the allocations have been made, the various committees track these allocations to ensure that the nation has value for money. The ministry
Honorable members, don't tempt me to name members. Honorable members, don't tempt me to name members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Minister, I will grant you the permission to do away with the mask. I know that COVID is still with us, but it looks like there's some obstruction because of the type of mask you are using. So if you could, if not, then we need more volume of your voice, because I myself was struggling to capture what you were saying.
What?
Yes, you can go on. You are finished.
Yeah, could you, I had long COVID complications, and by the grace of God, we are doing very well now. So with your kind permission, I would like to maintain the face mask and ensure that my voice carries. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, so the ministry, as midwife, as we call ourselves, will always be in readiness to work with any parliamentary committee Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 expenditures have been broadly provided for in pages 274, 3 and 274 in the 2021 budget statement and economic policy, and also page 335 of the 2022 budget. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the granular issues at the various ministries, departments and agencies, the arms of government, including Parliament, as well as constitutional bodies, and also the state enterprises. I'm afraid that the committees would do a great job. The ministry does not follow these bodies on the various paths of expenditure, apart from the report they submit to the ministry. Notwithstanding this, and to set minds at ease, I'm here for the avoidance of doubt to respond to the allocations made to the various bodies and institutions. Mr. Speaker, on 11th March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. This moment has marked a defining moment in world history, and its impact still reverberates globally. Mr. Speaker, here in Ghana, we recorded our first 2 cases on 12 March 2020. His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo immediately put together a task force which spearheaded the development of a bold, comprehensive, and decisive strategy to ensure that we are not overwhelmed by the pandemic. In line with this strategy, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy of Ghana was assessed and measures designed to address its immediate impact. However, the impact of the pandemic was even more severe than anticipated, both globally and domestically. It has upended and exposed the weaknesses in critical structures and systems in education, health, economic life, and communities. The pandemic triggered a sharp and heavy disruption in global supply chains as lockdowns and restrictions led to reductions in demand and production levels. Mr. Speaker, this has required us to undertake major fiscal measures beyond what we programmed prior to the pandemic, to finance the additional expenditure such as support to households, engagement of additional health personnel, deployment of security personnel at our borders to enforce the COVID-19 protocols, as well as the procurement of personal protective equipment. Government has had to adopt major fiscal measures to accommodate the increased expenditures and the shortfalls in revenue. Though our response was bold, decisive, and compassionate, it has also been costly. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that on 30th March 2020, I made a statement to Parliament on the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy of Ghana, following which the implementation of the Coronavirus Alleviation Program commenced. Furthermore, during the presentation of the 2020 mid-year fiscal policy, I indicated that a supplementary request included a program funding of 19.3 billion budget both directly and indirectly. On the expenditure side, an amount of 11.16 billion was programmed for COVID-19 related expenses, detailed attached as Appendix 1. The difference of 8.14 billion was programmed to provide for shortfalls in revenue. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the budget programmed the total amount of 4.6 billion for COVID-19 related expenses, detailed attached as Appendix 2. It is worth noting that the Ministry of Finance mobilized the needed financial resources whilst the various COVID-19 interventions and related expenses were implemented by the relevant sector ministries and agencies. Mr. Speaker, to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on businesses and households, ensure that economic activities recover and minimize job losses, government mobilized 18.19 billion out of the program 19.3 billion in 2020 from various funding sources as shown in Table 1 to support the budget. GOG contingency fund of 1.2 billion, World Bank group funds of 1.3 billion, IMF 1 billion program, AFDB 405 million, EU 504 million, BOG bonds 10 billion, summing up to 19.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, government program funding of 1,203,715,085 cedis to finance the coronavirus alleviation program. This program focused on achieving 5 key objectives: limit and stop the importation of the virus, contain its spread, provide adequate care for the sick, limit the impact of the virus on social and economic life, and inspire the expansion of our domestic capability and deepen our self-reliance. The Ministry of Health also led the preparation and implementation of the Emergency Preparedness and Response Plan, which was financed with funds from the World Bank. An amount of $230 million was secured from various facilities under the World Bank to support the implementation of COVID-19 Emergency Preparedness and Response Plan. The funding facilities included the fast-track COVID-19 facility, $35 million. This financing is Ghana's share of the World Bank's $4 billion fast-track COVID-19 facility that was announced in March 2020 to enable countries deal with the pandemic. GARID SEC $65 million. This amount was drawn from the existing World Bank-funded Greater Accra Resilient and Integrated Development Project by activating the contingency response component of the project. An additional financing of $130 million in November 2020 to strengthen and scale up the gains of the EPRP. Mr. Speaker, an additional financing of $200 million was also secured in 2021, largely for the acquisition and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines to support other sources of financing of the vaccination program under this plan. The plan sought to achieve the following: strengthen coordination of the overall preparedness activities. Strengthen capacity of regions, priority health facilities and points of entry to prevent, rapidly detect, investigate and control any COVID-19 outbreak in Ghana. Strengthen national capacity for laboratory surveillance and diagnostics. Build capacity for early diagnosis, case management, contact tracing and infection prevention and control. Ensure minimum health logistics are in place in prioritized regions, health facilities and points of entry for preparedness and laboratory capacity sustained for timely and quality testing of COVID-19 samples. And increase public awareness on COVID-19, risk mitigation and response measures. Budget support. Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the above sources of funds, other funds were sourced to support the budget. These include the $1 billion from the International Monetary Fund, 10 billion Ghana cedis from the Bank of Ghana, $69.3 million from the Africa Development Bank, and $99.7 million from the European Union. By the grace of the Almighty God, through our well-designed plans and the internal and external funds we mobilize, government provided support to the frontline health workers, protected livelihoods and job losses, demonstrated care to the vulnerable in society, and supported small businesses. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that the status of utilization of the funds to finance the COVID-19 measures excludes funds of the National COVID-19 Trust Fund and the Ghana Private Sector COVID-19 Fund. Mr. Speaker, for the year 2020 and 2021, the program expenditure amounted to $15.763 million for the COVID-19 related expenditure, out of which the actual utilization was $12.036 million. In 2020, a total amount of $11.162 million, this includes a cap, was programmed for COVID-19 related expenditure. Out of this amount, a total of $8.12 billion was utilized. The amount was utilized to provide support to households, supply equipment and provide relief to health workers, health infrastructure, security operations, evacuations, quarantine and coordination, economic relief, stabilization and revitalization, and COVID-19 complementary releases. Mr. Speaker, a total amount of $4.6 billion was programmed in the 2021 budget for COVID-19 related expenses. At the end of 2021, total utilization was 3.9 billion, representing 85% utilization. Expenditure on COVID-19 falls within the following broad categories: supports to household, health responses, health infrastructure, security operations, economic relief, COVID-19 vaccines, other COVID-related expenditure, all summing up to the 12.03 billion. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I wish to dispel the notion that there have been inconsistencies in government data on COVID-19. His Excellency the President intimated during the State of the Nation address on 30th March 2022 that we had mobilized about 17.7 billion since 2020 to fight the pandemic. We subsequently reconciled the data, and I can report that as of end May 2022, we've mobilized 18.19 billion to mitigate the effect of the pandemic. Again, when His Excellency the Vice President indicated on 7th April 2022 at the National TESCON Conference that government has spent 8.1 billion on COVID-19, it was within the context of expenditures for 2020, as I've already indicated. Right Honourable Speaker, permit me to use this occasion to highlight the financial management and accountability framework for receipt and use of public funds, especially as relates to COVID-19. All public expenditures are incurred from funds approved by the Honourable House. These expenditures may be drawn from the Consolidated Fund, Contingency Fund, or other statutory funds earmarked for specific purposes. At the onset of COVID-19, the Ministry of Finance applied for and obtained approval of Parliament to lower the cap on the Stabilization Fund. This enabled the transfer of approximately 1.2 billion to the Contingency Fund. Upon approval by Parliament, 1.2 billion was drawn from the Contingency Fund to support government efforts to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. In the 2020 Mid-Year Fiscal Policy Review, revisions were made to the 2020 budget to reflect policy changes as well as executive decisions made to mitigate the effect of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the 2021 budget included the necessary provisions to facilitate mitigation of the residual effects of COVID-19 and to facilitate the revitalization of the Ghanaian economy. To ensure transparency and accountability in the use of funds earmarked for COVID-19 mitigation, existing financial management rules and regulations were used to disburse funds whilst ensuring the necessary timelines required in dealing with the pandemic were met. Mr. Speaker, in line with our financial management rules and regulations, all covered entities keep records and subject themselves to internal audit on a continuous basis, as well as external annual audits by the Supreme Audit Institution of Ghana, the Audit Service. Mr. Speaker, in the 2020 mid-year review and supplementary estimates, I presented a comprehensive update on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures government have put in place to contain it. Furthermore, in the 2021 budget, government presented to this august House the budget statement and economic policy, including a detailed breakdown and justification for the COVID-19 expenditure, including a statement showing the sources of funds and expenditure on COVID-19, and this was duly approved by the House. Again, in November 2021, when I presented the 2022 budget, I provided further updates and schedules on COVID-19 expenditure. Mr. Speaker, I now proceed to provide additional details on the COVID-19 expenditure that I have listed. Support to households. Mr. Speaker, total amount programmed for the initiatives under the support to households in 2020 was 1.718 billion, out of which amount utilized was 1.55 billion. The details include a total amount of 12.1 million for the distribution of packed hot food in Accra, Makasua, and Greater Kumasi. This includes the cost of transportation of packed food in some suburbs of Greater Kumasi by NADMO. The expenditure for the provision of hot meals during the lockdown served about 2.7 million persons for the period of the lockdown at a unit cost of 4 cedis 32 pesos. A total amount of 42.24 million was expended on distribution of dry food packages through faith-based organizations in Greater Accra and Kumasi. A total of about 470,000 persons received these food packages. As part of the support to households, Mr. Speaker, governments through the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and its agency, Ghana Water Company Limited, provided free water, which initially lasted for the period April to September 2020. Following an executive directive, this was extended to December 2020 for lifeline consumers. The distribution was also carried out by the Community Water and Sanitation Agency and other smallholder water supply organizations. An amount of 556 million was budgeted in 2020 for this program, out of which 456 million was utilized. In 2021, a total allocation of 200 million Ghana cedis was made for the provision of free water and electricity for lifeline consumers, out of which 143 million was utilized. Government also made provision in the budget for free electricity to lifeline consumers and absorbed 50% of all electricity bills for all residential and commercial customers. A total cost of 1.04 billion was utilized for the policy from April to September 2020. Health response supplies, equipment and relief for health workers. Mr. Speaker, the total amount programmed for the measures under the health response in 2020 was 1.522 billion, out of which an amount of 1.049 billion was utilized. The details are as follows. A total amount of 2 million cedis for busing health workers within Accra, Tema, Kumasi, and Kasua to and from work for the duration of the lockdown and metro mass transport. The whole amount was utilized, with 0.7 million going to CAPTI and 1.3 million going to support the services of the Metro Mass Transport Company. A total of 80 million Ghana cedis was programmed to pay 50% of the basic salary as allowance for frontline workers. All requests have been reconciled and paid. Total 1.44 billion was programmed for the provision of PPEs, testing kits, and medical equipment, as well as to undertake community engagements. Other expenditure includes communication, quarantine, and treatment for COVID-19. An amount of 1.01 billion was utilized. Health infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in the wake of the pandemic, government took a bold decision to provide health infrastructure in the districts and regions that did not have a district or regional hospital. In all 111 district, regional, and mental hospitals, Agenda 111 were programmed for construction. A total of 600 million Ghana cedis was released to begin the construction across the country in 2020. In the 2021 budget, an amount of 779 million was programmed for the continuation of Agenda 111 projects. Out of this, an amount of 763.92 million has been released. Mr. Speaker, government programmed a total amount of 1.2 billion for security operations, evacuation of Ghanaians stranded abroad, and coordination of MMDA sanitation and disinfection exercises. As at 31st December 2020, amount of 875 million was utilized. This expenditure was utilized by the Ministries of Local Government and Rural Development, the Interior, Justice and Attorney General, Defense, National Security, and God. Mr. Speaker, in addition, measures to stabilize the economy after the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, government also implemented programs to revitalize the economy and protect jobs. These include the Coronavirus Alleviation Program Business Support Scheme, CAPBUZ, by the NBSSI, now the Ghana Enterprise Agency, which provided soft loans to 302,000 small and medium-scale businesses across the country to mitigate the economic impact of the pandemic and protect jobs. A total of 600 million was utilized. The Ghana Cares Over Atampa program was launched in November 2020 to make strategic investments in the rail sector of the economy. Total amount released as at the end of 2021 was 539 million Ghana cedis out of the total program amount of 1.5 billion cedis. And the establishment of the Development Bank of Ghana to address gaps in the Ghanaian credit markets, especially the availability of medium and long-term finance for the private sector. A total amount of 853 million has been transferred to the bank as seed capital. Mr. Speaker, other measures include the transfer of 1.5 million to the statutory funds in line with the approved budget to enable them to deliver on their mandate. This was occasioned by the non-performance of revenues largely due to the global lockdowns, and the payment of 1.267 billion to contractors to settle outstanding indebtedness to contractors that were programmed to be paid in 2020 with revenues collected, as well as ease the financial burden that arose due to the outbreak of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, due to the COVID-19 protocols, the Electoral Commission and National Identification Authority had to increase their registration sites and recruit more personnel to ensure compliance during the registration and voting. An amount of 401 million was transferred to the NIA and EC as additional support to ensure COVID-19 compliant registration and voting. National COVID-19 response to school reopening. Mr. Speaker, in September 2020, while other countries had closed all schools, government, with the advice of experts, took the bold decision to partially reopen schools to enable final year students write their final exams under very strict COVID-19 protocols. This was largely successful with minimal infections among the students. An amount of 1.119.73 billion was allocated for mass school reopening in January 2021. This was to ensure that all students and teachers were provided with infection prevention and control items. Total amount utilized was 1.118 billion. Procurement of COVID-19 vaccines. Mr. Speaker, the acceleration of sustained socio-economic recovery through advances in vaccine development required the mobilization of significant resources to enable the deployment of a mass vaccination program. The urgent need to vaccinate a target of 20 million people to achieve herd immunity and strengthen the health system in Ghana required the government of Ghana makes a significant allocation for the purchase of vaccines. A total amount of 929.3 million was therefore allocated in the 2021 budget for the procurement of vaccines. The National Deployment and Vaccination Plan estimated an amount of $51.6 million to undertake the vaccination deployment. A total amount of 776 million Ghana cedis was released for the purchase of Sputnik V, the Janssen CoV-SARS-2 COVID vaccines, and the emergency deployment of vaccines in schools. As of 31st March 2022, a total of 5.4 million vaccines have been deployed and received into the country. Since the commencement of the COVID-19 campaign, March 2nd, 2021, 14.3 million doses of vaccines have been administered as of April 25th, 2022. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this presentation demonstrates government's commitment to accountability and transparency. All program mobilized and utilized funds have been duly reported on. As a government, we continue to operate an open-door policy and welcome any opportunity to engage in the national interest. Let me reiterate that never before in the history of the Fourth Republic has the entire Ghanaian economy and society experienced such severe shock occasioned by a single external event. Indeed, from independence to date, the Ghanaian economy has never faced such a sudden nationwide dramatic reduction in household and corporate economic activity. But as the President said in one of his addresses to the nation during the coronavirus outbreak, our survival is in our hands and it continues to be in our hands. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity and God bless our homeland, Ghana.